Why don't you take a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem? All right. We're going to talk about some more questions that I have received from viewers, and I think there's some very interesting questions here. So without further ado, let's dive straight in. I'm just noting timestamps. Do pen companies tune the nibs of pens they send out to reviewers? Do reviewers request that? I realize this is kind of an honor system thing. I think I can be brief about it. By far, most companies do not tune nibs when they send them to reviewers. I know this because more than once nibs are not perfectly tuned when I receive them. As to requesting it, I can remember in 10 years of reviewing, one instance where I was actually given a choice, and that was a pen by Appelboom. I was being sent a pen by Joost Appelboom, and he had hired Annabelle as his nib specialist. And he said, when you're going to review this pen, because it was sent for review, would you like Annabelle to have a look at it? And I specifically said, well, no, please, because I know that her qualities are such that she will turn that nib into a very nicely writing nib. But that, to me, if I then review that, does not convey the experience of what it would be like to write with that pen out of the box. So if people were to purchase that pen from Appelboom and choose to not have it tuned by Annabelle, then the writing experience would be different. I hope you'll forgive me this slightly elaborate illustration, but I think it's an important point to make, and that's why, if I have the choice, which is very rarely, think about how few companies actually offer in-house nib tuning services. It's not that many. Appelboom is one. Nibs.com, of course, has done it for a long time. But beyond that, not a whole lot comes to mind, except for those companies that create their nibs in-house. Like, say, Aurora is something that I want to say is a company that does that itself. But even then, if I'm given a choice, I always say no, and being given that choice is very rare. So I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for other reviewers, because they may do whatever the hell they want to do. But for me, no and no. I hope that makes sense and answers your question. Okay, next. Why would JoWo discontinue number 8 nibs? Yes, as far as I understand, JoWo has discontinued the number 8 nibs. There may or may not have been some issues recently with JoWo nib housings cracking. I have a lot of JoWo, I have JoWo nibs. I have not had any cracking issues that I can remember, but people all over the world report massive issues. And obviously I'm not doubting that, then that is a problem. But I have the feeling that this discontinuation occurred well before that whole tragedy occurred. So then why? I'm guessing it has something to do with the simple fact that most pens use number 5 or number 6 nibs. And I was just looking, these are not... prices is what I'm trying to say. These are not prices for JoWo, but for Bock nibs. But I checked fpnibs.com. They sell number 6 gold Bock nibs for 122 euros. And number 8 Bock nibs for 180 euros. So it's a reasonable difference in price, right? So I assume that if you produce something that is probably the most expensive thing that you produce, because the number 5 nibs are cheaper than number 6, I assume, and number 6 is less expensive than number 8, etc. Then I would say that it's probably not worth it. Right? It's probably not worth to keep producing something if, relatively speaking, there just isn't much demand for those kinds of nibs, and especially if people just don't use that on such a scale, or if companies don't use that on such a scale, don't have pens that use those kinds of nibs in such a scale or on such a scale, I guess it might just not be tenable to keep producing them. Now, of course, this is complete speculation. I'm not a spokesperson for JOWO, but I would expect when it comes to business decisions like this, that's related to money. And that's just not enough sales, that it's not profitable enough to make something relatively expensive that not a lot of people buy. All right. This one I can be short about. I've abbreviated it a bit, but any thoughts of designing your own pen? Yes. And I've had a discussion about that in an online stream I did. What I can say about the project is that it's very slow going. And I don't fully understand why, but it is very slow going. It is, as far as I'm concerned, still very much happening. So what I will say is keep your eyes peeled. Okay. The final question that I have for today is, from which continent would you think the next irresistible innovation would come? Irresistible to me. And pen-related innovation. Now that's a question that I have really been thinking a lot about, because that one I find hard to answer. My gut feeling would say that might very well be Japan. Simply because if you look, for example, at the Sailor specialty nibs, I think those nibs are really remarkable and are very different from what most other pen companies are doing. Now, having said that, that's a known set of specialty nibs. Some may never be in existence again, like King Cobra or something. I don't believe there's any immediate ideas to start to produce that again. But having said that, I do think that when it comes to nibs, the Japanese companies do interesting things, and especially Sailor, of course. But overall, I find the Japanese nibs to be, in general, whether that's Pilot, Platinum, Sailor, those are for me the main brands. I always find them to be very well tuned. They're always very well made, and I would really say that almost every single time I try out a Japanese nib, it writes flawlessly, and it writes flawlessly out of the box. So that I think is very nice. Now that's not necessarily an innovation, but in a way it is, because we also see a lot of companies that use nibs or churn out nibs that simply won't write properly, or that have a lot of issues, or that have insane amounts of apparently insurmountable obstacles in creating nibs that write, and then you have severe quality control issues. I don't know where exactly that comes from, but I have discussed that at some point in a previous episode, so I'm not going to have that whole discussion again. I do think something could be said for the idea that it is now becoming revolutionary that you create a pen that writes, based on what some companies are doing. So from that perspective, I think something coming from again, Japanese companies, I do find that, I mean, it shouldn't be innovative that your fountain pen actually writes, but I do think it's interesting. As to other, because I also realize this is not the most spectacular or interesting answer, right? But when it comes to innovation and innovative stuff, what else can you do with a fountain pen? I think there are only two real innovative things that you can do. One is you can create a pen that allows you to digitize the writing. This already exists. There are apps that you can use where you have sort of special notebooks that you write on, and then that digitizes your writing. So that's already there. And therefore, that might be refined. I would like to see a fountain pen, and maybe that does exist and I missed it, but I would like to see a fountain pen that you can write with and that basically just sends all that writing, I don't know, through Bluetooth or something to an app on your cell phone. And all that writing is digitized, right? It would be very interesting if you could do something with OCR so that that can actually be turned into typing, for example. This could be interesting if you work on manuscripts that need to be typed up, for example. But again, partially the technology is there. So I don't know how innovative that truly is. The final thing I will say about this is that I also think that you can try to... I typically use the term digitize a fountain pen by somehow putting something in it that makes that a more versatile tool that you can also use in a digital setting. And then I think, for example, I think it was Monteverde that was the first company to put capacitive tips on a fountain pen so that you could sort of use your screen or operate a device's screen with it. Another thing that comes to mind is, I know that the name eludes me right now, but ST Dupont makes a pen that has a USB drive in it, so you can also store files on it. And I'm sure that there are other things that you could do that would allow you to interact with a digital device with your fountain pen. Right, I mean, again, I maybe you could have some sort of storage device you could put a micro SD card in or something like that. That is also, I think, something that I would find interesting because it elevates the fountain pen from just a pen to something that has other features. I can't pinpoint a country that would come up with that first, right? I mean, as I said, ST Dupont is different from Monteverde, different countries. But those, I've tried to make this a little broader and kind of just discussed, pardon me, innovative things that I think we will see, that we will continue to see. And of course, maybe a final thing, I mean, you can maybe have some sort of pen with different writing modes, so you get a fountain pen that's also a ballpoint, but that largely already exists because you already have Pen BBS pens, for example, that have a rollerball on one end and a fountain pen on the other end. So, I mean, I don't think that is revolutionarily new anymore at this point. Anyway, that's what I have. That's what I would say. And that's pretty much it. So I think that's what I had for today. I hope that was useful. I got a lot more questions. If you have any questions for future episode, please leave them below. Bear in mind that I typically record a few in a row when I have collected a number of questions. So it may take a little bit of time for me to get to the question, but I get to pretty much everything. I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you later. Bye.